Hey, good morning. Wasn't that a great question? What if we could live fearless? That was really the heart of what we're doing this whole series, and today I get to wrap it up. If you haven't journeyed with us so far, you can catch all the other sessions on YouTube, catch up and find out what we've been doing, catch up on what we've been discussing. But that really has been our heart, that we would be able to address a topic that is so relevant and pertinent to our society, and also that say that, hey, there's hope in the midst of that. So wherever you are, whether you're a new believer, an old believer, like you've been following Jesus for a long time, or whether you're just curious and exploring, thank you so much for being here. We hope that you would actually catch something of hope, that we can all live with less fear in our lives. And just think about just imagine for a moment, just use your incredible brain that you've been given and created with, just imagine what you could do if you lived with no fear. And I don't mean like being stupid, like walking blindfold across the motorway, I know what, I'm going to go to the M25 and get a blindfold on and just walk across. No, I don't mean being like stupid, but like, that situation where you just didn't do it, or where you held back, or you didn't say something you wanted to say, or maybe a relationship that you didn't step into, or a job that you applied for, or a house that you'd hoped you were going to try to figure out how you could buy, or, a place in the country you were going to move. What are the things in your life where you actually, if you just reflect for a moment, you realize, I didn't do that, not because I was being wise, but because I was being fearful. Okay? Just think for a moment, how would our lives be different if we lived with less fear? If we loved with less fear? If we cared with less fear? If we treated others with less fear? What if our lives could be less fear? What if you could experience something stronger than fear? Because fear holds us back. Ultimately, fear holds us back. It controls us. It restricts us. It controls us. It holds us back. And what if we could experience something that's stronger than our fear? And this month we've been journeying through this whole topic, and I've looked at the past and the present, and today we're going to be looking at the fear of the future. How can we step into something new? How can we try different things if there was something in our lives that would help us face the future? And we're going to just look at some first-hand accounts of some people. We're going to journey with them, find out what their story were like, a little bit of what their experience is like. Because I don't know about you, but it's kind of nice to read a biography with somebody who's kind of journeyed something similar to you. If you're really into music, and you're just like, let's say you love jazz, you probably didn't get Richard Branson's biography, right? You got like Miles Davis, right? Think about it. If you're really, 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 into, computers and the technology and stuff like that, maybe you did get Steve Jobs' biography. You'd pick that one up before you'd pick up the one about Miles Davis, right? Some of you are thinking, who's Miles Davis? The rest of the artists are thinking, who's Steve Jobs? No, I'm just kidding. No, so isn't it nice when we journey through life, you kind of want somebody who's walked a bit of the same path we have, or had some similar experiences. And, we do that when we pick up biographies in the bookstore. And we're going to do that this morning. You're going to look at some people's lives, a little bit of what they journeyed and what they experienced. Because a lot of people, I think I said this the first week, a lot of people, when it comes to the Bible, which is the collection of books, it's 66 different books. It's like a library that's been put together, 66 different books. It's not one book, it's 66 separate books, like a library that have a thread through them all about the life of Jesus. And the amazing thing about this is, and sometimes we think of, especially the New Testament, which is like the second half. If you have an old-fashioned one, it was made out of paper. Nowadays, it's made out of silicone. But anyway, no, if you had an old-fashioned Bible, like the first half was what they called the Old Testament, or the first half, we'll do it this side, left to right, yeah. First half was the Old Testament, yeah. And there's like kind of lots of history and stuff, especially of the Israelites, the Jewish people. A lot of their history, the stories of the kings and queens and how people grew and moved and journeyed and all that kind of stuff. And then in the New Testament, which is the second half of the book, if you like, that's about like the life of Jesus and the followers, and then as you get later on into the New Testament, you hear about the early church. It's like a history book for the early church. But a lot of times, some people take the Bible and we think, oh, this is just a book about Jesus and his life and his experience. And it is, of course it is. But it's also a book about the people who experienced what it meant to follow Jesus and who actually lived it themselves. It's not only an apologetic about the life of Jesus, it's actually an apologetic or a defense or an explanation of their lives as well. And it's their history too. Of course, it's not just the story of Jesus, it's the story of these people who followed Jesus. And so we're going to look at their stories. The Bible is their stories. And Jesus gathered a group of followers. They call them disciples. It just means someone who's a follower of you. And that's a little selfie that they did a while back. I'm sure that was probably generated by AI. But anyway. No. So, these people, they gathered a group of people, and they spent 3 years with Jesus. And they were from different walks of life and different experiences, different educational backgrounds, different status in life, etc. And they watched Jesus firsthand, and they heard how he spoke to people. And they heard him teach, and they heard him address things and challenge things. And then they saw things with their own eyes. They saw the way he cared for people and touched people he shouldn't have been touching, like people who were unclean and people who were outcasts, like lepers and dead people and people who were bleeding and things that you weren't supposed to do. And then he sat down and ate with people you weren't supposed to sit down and eat with. And they're watching all this firsthand. They're experiencing Jesus live life in the flesh. And so they're learning and growing and discovering, like, right in front of us. And then we have 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And 3 of them are like first-hand accounts. So Matthew, Mark, and John are first-hand accounts. Luke was written by Luke later on in life, more like an investigative report. But the other 3 are like first-hand accounts. And they're all 4 of them are biographies of their experience in their life with Jesus. And so just going to look at some of the stuff that they did. And not only did they see the amazing things that Jesus did, like healing people and caring for people and welcoming children and old people and Romans. He healed a Roman centurion's child. It's like, what's going on? They see him doing all these kind of things. But then they also saw the most cruel aspect of the world. The one that mistreats you and misunderstands you, and the one where even though you try to do the right thing, and even though you do the right thing, somehow people think it's wrong. They saw this guy who was giving everything for others. And in spite of that, in spite of the toll it took on him physically, they saw him how he was worn out and tired, and they saw the toll it was as he poured his life out for others. Even that was misunderstood and misjudged and mistreated. And so much so that they got to see firsthand cruelty at its best, where people think that the only way to deal with somebody is through violent means. And so he was put to death, right? He was arrested and tortured, beaten, killed, crucified on a cross like a common criminal. These followers, these group of people, and there's way more followers than just the 12 that are listed. They were like the main 12, if you like, the main core. But there was wider groups. Jesus references different numbers at different times throughout the Gospels. They saw firsthand Jesus get destroyed by the thing that he came to love and come to care for. And they're seeing this. Okay, this is their history. This is their experience. They're living it. This is like a living story that we read. And it's not just the life of Jesus. As I say, it's the life of these followers who also, just grew up, if you like. Spent 3 years following Jesus, spending so much time with him. We read how they got it wrong. We read how they got it right. We read how they made mistakes. We read how they said stupid things, how they did stupid things. And we read how Jesus forgave them and restored them. We read how after Jesus died, they hid for fear, thinking that they were going to be the next ones on the list for the politicians and the soldiers, the Jews and the Romans, to destroy them, to wipe out the movement that they were so excited about. We read about them, and then it's crazy. But as we move on in their stories and in their history, we discover that almost every single one of them died for what they believed in. Almost every single one of them. Of course, Let me just read through the list. There were 12 disciples originally, the main 12, if you like. And if you look through the records, some of them are in the Bible, because once you get to the book of Acts, which is the history of the church, we've got some records there of James being put to death. But the other ones, we have records through history and tradition of the church. There's other early documents. And then here's the list of the 12. James was killed. It's in Acts. He was killed by the sword. It was Herod Agrippa arrested him and killed him. Peter was then the next one. They believe he was crucified upside down because he said it wasn't worthy for him to be crucified like Jesus was. Andrew was believed to have been hung from a tree. Thomas was stabbed with spears and then burned alive. Philip was tortured and then crucified. Matthew was actually put to death in the middle of a service he was leading because he'd upset one of the local leaders, and they killed him, while he was speaking. So I might just need to have a few more extra people at the front. No, just kidding. They killed him in the middle of a service as he was slain at the altar. Nathanael was flayed and then crucified. James the Lesser was thrown off the temple roof. Simon the Zealot was also crucified. Thaddeus was beaten to death with clubs. Matthias was the guy that replaced Judas, and he was killed. He was crucified while he was hanging on the cross. They actually took up stones and stoned him while he was hanging on the cross. And out of the original 12, only 2 were not put to death. Judas took his own life. So remember, within hours of actually Jesus being betrayed, he turned Jesus in. He betrayed Jesus. Jesus was killed, and Judas didn't expect Jesus to come back to life. I mean, if he knew Jesus was coming back from the dead, he would not have taken his own life. So Judas killed himself. He clocked out early, if you like. And then there's only one to have died of natural causes out of the original 12. There's a guy named John. He still lived a martyr's life. He was exiled to an island. He was arrested many times. He was beaten and tortured and thrown into jail. We have stories of that happening in the book of Acts, stories of him and Peter being thrown into jail a couple of times, being beaten a few times. And these guys who used to fish for a living and do other things and were afraid and frightened, somehow even, and you can read about it in Acts 4 and Acts 5, after being arrested and being beaten, and they're told to stop preaching Jesus' name, what do? They go straight back out and do it again. And they're like, hey, where are these guys? We can't find them. We've arrested them. What in the world's going on? And they said, oh, they're back in the square. They're back there preaching again. And it's like, what happened in their lives to somehow give them this boldness or this courage or this ability to face fear? And why, how in the world did so many of them decide to give their life for Jesus, And John is an old man, and as an older man, he writes some letters to the church. And you might know this already, but it's a kind of a cool fact if you don't know this. When in the Bible, there's some of the letters at the end of the book that are written to specific churches in specific places. So you've got Ephesus is a place, you can visit it today still. And there's a letter that Paul wrote to them called Ephesians. And there's other letters that are written to specific churches. Colossians, written to the people in Colossae, again, a place you can still visit. But the books of John wrote some letters to the church. His letters were for the churches. It wasn't to one specific group of people. It was to basically the churches across the Greco-Roman Empire at the time. He wasn't just writing to one group, he was writing to the churches. And John is writing these letters. And he's an old man, and he's the last OG, okay? That's original gangster for those of you who do not have children who play on the Xbox all day. Anyway, so yeah, and he is like the last of the OGs. Yeah, man. John is the last man standing. And he is writing from his experience, and he's sharing his heart, and they're beautiful letters. And they came up with some really creative names. 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. There we go, right? So anyway, he writes these letters named after him, called him, and he writes this phrase, and you've probably heard this phrase. It's in 1 John 4, 18, and he says this. He says, there is no fear in love. There's no fear in love. And what kind of love is he talking about? Romantic love, just because I love chocolate or I love ice cream. No, he's talking about something. He's not talking about that kind of love. He said there's no fear in love. And just to kind of like tease it out a bit more, he says this, there's no fear in love because perfect love casts out fear. Perfect love casts out fear. There's only one person who can love perfect love, right? Who gives perfect, complete, whole, restorative love. He's talking about God's love. And when you read the whole letter that he wrote, you can discover he's talking about the love of God. And this perfect love is not based on their performance, and it's not based on what they've done, but simply based on who Jesus is. It's out of him. It's out of who he is that he's loving. And this kind of love actually does something to fear. It drives it out. Isn't that kind of, I find it encouraging because when you think about the word casts out, it's not just saying, let's say you got a cat. I don't know if you have a cat. I'm a dog person. If you're a cat person, that's okay. I think you can still go to heaven. I think you can when you die. I'm not sure. But anyway, no. So if you're a cat, I know you are. If you're a cat person, you got a cat that comes in the kitchen, you're trying to do stuff and you go, shh, 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 and it skittles away. Yeah? Okay, this is not perfect love goes to fear. Just go. Perfect love casts, drives out, destroys, throws out, abolishes, moves, shoves, gets rid. Okay? This is not a timid, tame word. Perfect love casts out fear. It's a beautiful letter. It's a gentle phrase, but he's actually saying something powerful. Perfect love drives out fear. Drives out fear. It's like love is going to take up so much space that fear cannot have any room to breathe. Fear can go. It's not that fear doesn't exist anymore. It's that fear is just pushed out. John's not saying fear doesn't exist. John's not saying fear is not real. John is saying, hey, perfect love pushes out, takes up the space that fear used to have. It takes it out. Because fear is strong, but God's love is stronger. That's what he's saying. Fear is strong. It's powerful. God's love is stronger. And you're like, so what? This is just a nice idea? Thanks, John. This is like some really it's a cool thing, but how does it really, really work? And I think for us to figure out how it really works, we're going to look at another character who also grew up and had these experiences with Jesus. There's a guy named Paul, and Paul is a great story especially if you're exploring faith. Paul went from somebody who was totally opposed to Jesus. He was anti-Jesus, anti-faith. He not only was anti-faith, he did something about the movement. He tried to stop it. He arrested people, threw them into jail, oversaw their torture, oversaw their death. It's talked about in Acts. He was there when Stephen was being stoned. He was the first martyr of the church. And this is the guy Paul. And Paul has this experience, and he goes from being this Jesus hater trying to destroy the movement to becoming a Jesus follower and becoming the pioneer of the movement. He basically did so much to carry and spread the gospel. It's like he did an entire 180-degree change of directions. His life was going this way, and he went that way. And it's estimated that Paul traveled over 10,000 miles across the Mediterranean, the ancient Mediterranean world. He went on numerous journeys. There's records and histories and things. You can visit places that he's been. He's a verified, historically reliable, factual person that really lived and really existed and really traveled. And we've got so much records of Paul because Paul went so many places. And this guy was rough and ready. He was passionate. He didn't do things by halves. I think, he was one of those guys. He was either all in. He was all in trying to squash it, and then something happened, changed everything about his life. He had this encounter with Jesus, which changed everything about his life, and he was all in. Paul he's 100% kind of guy, And if you are moving house, that's the kind of person you want, right? Don't you want, like, if you've got something to do, you've got a task, you're like, oh, I've got to fix this in my garden, I've got to put some fences up, or I've got to move house, whatever. You want somebody who's going to, like, be all in, not be like, ooh, ready for a cup of tea yet? And you're like, dude, you've been here 3 minutes. Like, come on. Like, I want somebody who's going to, like, work, right? I mean, Paul gives the impression that he is like just active and full on, and he's rough and ready. He ruffled feathers along the way, as you can imagine, and he experienced so many trials. He struggled with some, we don't even know what some of the things he struggled with. He wrote a few times about some of the stuff that he called the thorn in his flesh, and the stuff that he was battling himself. We don't even know what it is. Some people speculate it's the fact that all of a sudden you are now trying to tell people about how good Jesus is, but you were the one that threw my aunt in prison. Or you were the one that put my uncle in prison and stood there and watched while people killed him. Some people think that the thing he had to wrestle with was constantly being reminded, every community of followers that he went to, that at one point those same followers were frightened to death of him. And he had to stand and somehow tell them that God is good and God is kind and God is gracious and God is merciful. So, I mean, just think about how you'd have to wrestle with that. That's what he would have had to have carried. But we have records of him being whipped and beaten and imprisoned. In one place, they dragged him out of the city and they beat him up with sticks and stones. They stoned him. And then they thought he was dead. They actually walked away. They left him. They thought he was dead. And he got up and then went back into the city to carry on teaching. I mean, how do you do that? One place they had to get him out of this town, and he went down the side of a wall in a basket. I mean, there's crazy stories this guy went through. He's been chained for days and days, weeks and weeks, months and months. He was in prison more times than we're even fully aware of. He was put on trial numerous times. He was falsely accused numerous times. He'd been shipwrecked. It's like, man, this guy went through so much stuff. And he began to understand when he wrote a phrase saying, I bear in my body the marks of Christ, the scars, the wounds. He literally would have been scarred. Maybe he limped. Maybe he couldn't stand up straight anymore because of the things that I don't know. But he carried on his body the marks of being a Jesus follower. And there's even this time, he knew hunger, he knew famine, he knew desperation. There's even this time where they had a shipwreck, and then they crashed, and they get to this island, and then there's a bunch of logs, and they're going to build a fire. You might know the story. They're building the fire, right? And as he reaches move some of these logs, a snake comes out and bites him. And can this guy's life get any worse? It's like, man, you're experiencing everything. Anyway, he shook it off, I guess, threw it in the fire, and then he was fine, and they thought he was a god at that island, And then it's a cool story. You're thinking, these are crazy stories. They are crazy stories. Read about the life of Paul. It's just fascinating what he's gone through. So he knew what it was like to go through trouble, and he knew what it was like to go through hardship. And he knew what it meant to experience frightening and fearful and uncertain situations. We know that. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. Have you ever had an instance in your life where somebody tries to give you advice? And you're like, please. You have no trouble in your life. Aren't they the most annoying people to give you advice? It's like, let's say you're going through a financial hardship and someone wants to counsel you, and you're thinking, you have no idea what I'm going through. You get your nails done every week. It's like, wait, you have a cleaner 4 times a week or something, I don't know, you're like, you have no idea what I'm actually going through. Have you ever had that kind of, I think we probably all have had those moments of well-intentioned, but you're just like, annoying advice, right? And it's helpful when people speak from their own experience, like I said about the biographies before. When people speak from their own experience, it gives it a certain reliability. And all of a sudden, Paul is not writing from a place of having lived some perfect Teflon coated, never faced a problem. Nobody ever mistreated me. Nobody ever misunderstood me. Nobody knows the troubles I've been in. Yeah, nobody knows. Yeah, poor, so lonely me. Like, he's not writing from that sort of place. He's writing from a place of somebody who everywhere he's gone, every place he's going, he has faced hardship and challenge and trial after trial. We didn't even list it, there was relational fallouts. There was big bust-ups. I mean, this guy went through loads of stuff. He had to bring correction to some of the churches. He had to, he had to deal with stuff all the time. And so he's writing from a place that says, I have walked this road. I have walked this road, and I can tell you, I know what I'm talking about. And so it's encouraging, And Paul knows what it is to face fear. And he knows what it was to experience something stronger than fear. And he writes this, Romans 8:35. You might have heard this verse before as well. It's kind of popular. Who can separate us from the love of Christ? Who can separate us from the love of Christ? He's talking about, obviously, the love of Christ. The love of Christ. What could separate us from the love of Christ? And how is he expounding this? How is he explaining it? Just go back a couple verses. So if we go back to 8:31, 32, Paul is saying this. He asks this question. He says, if God is for us, who can be against us? He did not spare up his own son, but he gave him up for us all. And then he carries on, 8:34. Who then can condemn us? After what Jesus has done, now who can condemn us? Okay, who's going to be your condemner? Nobody. Jesus, who died and then was raised to life, is at the right hand of God interceding for us right now. Okay, this is what Paul's perspective is. This is what Paul is saying. Therefore, who can separate us from the love of Christ? If God is for us, who can be against us? If God didn't even spare his own son and willingly gave his son as a sacrifice for us all, then who can separate us from the love of God? And if Jesus would give his life for us, who then can condemn us? Nobody can condemn us, because even now, the one who was killed, put to death, has raised to life, and even now is at the right hand of the Father, interceding for you, appealing for you, interceding, going on your behalf, speaking on your behalf. When someone intercedes for you, that's like someone who speaks up for you, or who defends you, who's interceding for us. Even now at the right hand of the Father, interceding for us. Therefore, who can separate us from the love of Christ? And Paul is saying, when we see God's love as demonstrated through the life of Jesus, what Jesus did, what he did on the cross and his resurrection from the dead, when we see that and we understand it, that becomes such a powerful antidote to fear. That becomes the strong evidence of love that casts out fear. That is stronger than the fear you experience. That's what he's saying, It is so powerful. He's like, what could separate us from the love of Christ? And then he's like, hey, I know what. What about this? Trouble, hardship, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, sword, war. He just rattles off a bunch of examples, doesn't it? He just goes, what about all these things? What about all this stuff? And then he quotes a verse from Psalms. It's from Psalms 44, which is a book in the Old Testament. And he quotes his verse from Psalms, and he carries on and he says, remember what's written from Psalms. For your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep for the slaughter. I'm facing death all the time, and I'm not afraid. I'm facing death all the time. I'm not afraid. And when people think about me, you know what? They think I am nothing more than an animal with no other benefit than to be slaughtered. This is what he's saying. I'm living with this all the time. He's saying, we're risking our lives for you. I'm risking my life for you. just because there's death and just because people want to treat me just like as a lamb for slaughter, it's not going to stop me. Fear is strong. God's love is stronger. Fear is strong. God's love is stronger. And he just continues explaining and beautifully like expounding. He then carries on this. He says in verse 37, in all of these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. More than. Not just survivors. Not just I scraped by. Not just I made it through. More than a conqueror. More than a conqueror. Wow, like, isn't that cool? Through him who loved us. It's like I can be a conqueror not through my own strength, but because of something that someone else has done. You can be a conqueror because of what Jesus has done. Jesus has given his life for you. He's died for you. He rose from the dead. He's at the right hand of the Father interceding for you even now. And because of that thing, that one moment, you can be more than conquerors through all of these things. This is what Paul is saying to them. And then he carries on. He goes, I am convinced neither death or life, angels or demons, nothing in the present or in things to come or the future, no other powers, not height or depth, nothing in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God. Fear is real and fear is strong, but God's love is real. God is real and his love is stronger. God is real and his love is stronger. And the other thing that I find really helpful about what Paul's writing, not only did he experience it and live it, but he's telling us honestly what it means to follow Jesus. Here's what I mean. Maybe you've been peddled a message which goes like this. Give your life to Jesus, your life becomes perfect. Give your life to Jesus, your bank account balance will all of a sudden balance, right? Give your life to Jesus. You'll never get sick again. Give your life to Jesus. Your car will never break down. Give your life to Jesus. You'll always get the best jobs. Give your life to Jesus. All of your friendships will work out. Give your life to Jesus. Your kids will always be wonderful. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like, yeah, have you ever heard that sort of subtle message which basically implies it's some kind of exchange where once we do this little thing for him, for Jesus, we then somehow get these like perfect lives? But what Paul is saying, Paul basically is saying, no, that's not the way it works at all. It's not the way it works. You know, we are going to face tough times. You're going to face hardships. You're going to face things that will frighten you and be tough to face. But don't worry. When you face those things, you can be more than a conqueror. Don't worry. When you face them, you can be more than a conqueror. You know, you can, and how? Because of his love. You can overcome your fear. You can totally overcome your fear. You can live fearless. It helps when we understand how fear works, of course. But more than that, when we understand God's love is there to push out fear, it sets us free. And Paul understood this and lived it. You know, within 10 years, they estimate, with him writing this letter to the Romans, he was actually put to death himself. Paul himself was beheaded by the Emperor Nero. And what if, last week we talked about learning how to turn some of our situations. What if we could allow fear to turn us into love? What if we could allow, when we feel afraid, that we allow that to be something that pushes us into God's love, so that it can remind us that there's something stronger than what I'm facing right now, that there's something stronger. And maybe we could play around with the verse like what Paul did, and we could sort of imagine any scenario. You know, Paul just listed out, he said, like, you know, death, Life can't separate you. Angels, demons, anything you face in the present, anything you face in the past, anything you're worried about in the future. Any other powers, neither height nor depth, nothing in all of creation will be able to separate you from the love of God. Divorce will not separate you from the love of God, right? Bankruptcy will not separate you from the love of God. Maybe you're worried that you're single and you might think, I'm going to be single for the rest of my life. You will not be alone. That will not separate you from the love of God. Maybe losing your job will not separate you from the love of God. Not finding a better job will not separate you from the love of God. Economic crisis, war will not separate you from the love of God. An unplanned pregnancy will not separate you from the love of God. Cancer will not separate you from the love of God. Dementia will not separate you from the love of God. Alzheimer's will not separate you from the love of God. Just begin to put your brain to work and begin to imagine and write down anything you can think of. My family falling apart will not separate me from the love of God. What can you put down that you can think? This is what Paul is writing. It's what he's saying. Whatever you will face in life, whatever experience you will go through, it is not strong enough to separate you from the love of God. It's going to hurt like hell, and it's awful, and it's disgusting, and it's horrible, and it's not nice, and you're going to be walking through the valley of the shadow of death, but you will not fear any evil because I am with you. You will not have to be afraid because you can go through this trial, through this situation. You come out the other side. You might be broken, but you will be a conqueror. Because when you come out the other side, you have made it through. Whatever trial, whatever season, whatever you're going through in life, and we will have different seasons in life. We will have different trials. Different things will fall apart around us and inside us. And when that happens, let it be an opportunity to say, this is not stronger than you. Jesus, this is not stronger than what you've done. My life is falling apart, but you're stronger. And Paul didn't say everything will magically and wonderfully just go poof and be okay. What he says is you will be more than a conqueror. You'll make it through. The circumstance might not even change the way you want it to, but it will not separate you from the love of God. It's not strong enough to do that. It's a weakling. Because God's love is so strong. No panic attack, no mental anxiety, no nothing that you face, no loss of a loved one, no nothing you can face is stronger than the love of God. That's what he's saying. Nothing in all of creation can separate us from the love of God. That's what he says. Nothing. God's love isn't better, it's perfect. Right? That's what John said. It's not that his love is better, his love is perfect. His love is perfect. It's complete and whole. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no manipulation in God's love. God's love isn't love to try to take advantage of you. His love is perfect. His love doesn't make you feel bad about yourself. His love restores you. His love is perfect. Perfect. There's no insecurity in God's love. It's perfect. It's a perfect kind of love. And a love that perfect destroys fear. This is how we can be free from the mistakes in our past. Because this perfect love sets us free, right? The things that have maybe held us back, failures and shortcomings, they pale in the light of Jesus. This is what gets us through anxiety in the present. And knowing God's love for us, when we trust the one who loves us like this, we can face the future with no fear. When we trust the one who loves us like this, we can face the future with no fear. It's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies are new every day, right? Leviticus. Great is your faithfulness. Jeremiah says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. You see, this isn't a new thing that Paul and John are writing about. This is something that's in the heart of God. Fear is strong, but his love is stronger. His love makes the darkness tremble. His love is so powerful that fear will never, ever win. In just a moment, we're going to close, and we've been doing a song every single week. We've done it in the last 2 weeks. They've sung it last week, and then they sung it again today. And we're going to use this song again at the end of the service. And I want to put some of the lines up from the song. And it says this on the chorus. It says, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. And then as it gets to the bridge, it says this, your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. And what we've done the last few weeks is we've used this song almost like a reflection and even like a prayer. But today what I'd like us to do is use this as our war cry. This is our defiant stand against fear. This is our defiant 2 fingers up in the face of fear and say, you can get out. Because love casts out fear. And you might not feel comfortable with it. I know the song might be a bit slow. It would be better if it was like really loud and rocky. That'd be helpful, right? But what I'd like us to do, when we play the song in just a moment, instead of us, and maybe you do need to sit and reflect, and that's okay, but what I'd like to encourage us to do, when we play this song, use it as a declaration. We've done it every week now, so hopefully you've got the gist of the lyrics and the words and stuff. And I'd like us in a moment, if we could all stand and sing the song together. And we'll play it loud, if that's okay, because I like loud music, but anyway. But let this be our anthem. And decide today that even though fear is strong, that you will lean into something stronger. The love of God, the perfect love of God. And I'm going to turn my microphone off so I don't sing too loud. But go ahead and play that for us. If you're able and willing and want to do this, just go ahead and stand as a response, and we're going to use this song as our battle cry.
Peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name, still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still, every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, breathe, call these bones to live, call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, oh Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, your name is light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is life, forever lifted high. Your name darkness tremble, Jesus, Jesus.
Elsewhere, Paul wrote that he wanted the church, the people he was writing to have their eyes open so they could understand the height, the depth, the width, the length of God's love. So I would say that today is my prayer for you, that we would all know, we would be able to understand the eyes of our heart, the eyes of our mind, how we understand and see things would be opened up like a light going on, that we would be able to understand the height, the width, the depth, the length, the unsearchableness, the vastness, the hugeness of God's love. And I pray for every one of us here, whether you're in the room or online, I pray for you now that you would know the one who loves you so, so much. And I pray that this love will help you face every day and every moment in the future without fear. Father, we thank you that fear is strong, but you are stronger. Thank you so much. Thank you that we do not have to live overwhelmed by fear. And thank you that we can live fearless. In your name we pray. Amen. If we can help you with anything, chat about anything, please let us know. We can talk. At 12 o'clock, we need to go across the street. If you've got any children across the road, please collect them at 12. Stick around if you can, grab a drink, check out the notice board or the welcome table. And if you'd like prayer for anything, then please come and let us know. Have an amazing week, and we'll see you next Sunday.